Welcome to Seniority Authority, the podcast where I track down experts to answer your questions on aging. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. Let's get smarter about growing older. Everything you know about aging is wrong. As a society, we equate youth as success. Aging is failure. It's pervasive and relentless, and ageism is present in both subtle and overt messages throughout our culture in numerous ways. You could say that ageism is the last socially acceptable prejudice. Have you shopped for birthday cards recently? Do you struggle with the same thing that I do? Every birthday card over age 40 is doom and gloom. Once you get older, it's even worse. Jokes about incontinence, memory loss, sagging body parts. Just a joke, you say. But how does that stream of stereotypes inform how you think about the older person in front of you, in line, in traffic, or in the mirror? Words matter, and our next guest will share how buying into these assumptions can actually shorten your life. Welcome to Seniority Authority. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. Today's guest, Dr. Tracy Gendron, is author of the new book, Ageism Unmasked, Exploring Age Bias and How to End It. Dr. Gendron is chair of the Department of Gerontology at Virginia Commonwealth University and has a master's degree in both gerontology and psychology, as well as a PhD in developmental psychology. In her new book, she draws from more than 25 years of experience and cites the extensive body of research on the topic of ageism. Thanks to our show sponsor, the Riverwoods Group, Northern New England's largest family of nonprofit retirement communities, where active adults find community, purpose, and peace of mind. Visit riverwoodsgroup.org. Now let's hear from today's guest. Welcome to the Seniority Authority podcast, Dr. Gendron.
I'm so delighted to be here, Kathleen. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And I am thrilled because this has been a personal pet peeve of mine for many years. And when I came across your book, I was thrilled because this really digs into the background of why this is so prevalent and so accepted. Even the bold way that you start the book, which is everything you know about aging is wrong, is perfect. You note that what we are taught about aging is the start of the problem. Can you tell our listeners what inspired you to write this book?
Absolutely. And there's no one answer to that. There's so many things that inspired me to write this. And I think everything that you just talked about is a contributor to that. I really wanted to understand how we got to this moment in time. How is it that we have such pervasive, invisible, negative attitudes about what it means to age and what it means to be old? And I really started to think about a question that I get asked very frequently by people, which is, didn't we used to revere elders? And I was thinking about that question and going, I'd like to have a better answer to that. I'd like to have a more informed answer to that question. So that kind of prompted me to say, let's go back. Let's go back in time and let's kind of walk through history, walk through these different eras to figure out how we got here. And the answer to that question is yes and no. It's complicated. And I think that actually adds a lot of context because the truth is it's always been complicated. Yes, we have revealed elders. At the very same time, we have always seen aging as a process of disease. Very early references to that. So it's complicated. Ageism is complicated because aging is complicated. And that's, part of the reason why I wrote the book.
Well, and I love how you do go back and go through how everything started. You go through the very beginning of the concept and idea of retirement, which you point out in the book is a fairly new concept because people didn't generally live very long. So Can you tell us a little bit societally of how the idea of retirement came about?
Absolutely. And this is a new one for a lot of people who don't think about how this concept of retirement might actually contribute to ageism or a society that doesn't value the contributions of older people. So if you go back to like the 1930s, that was when Social Security started. 1935 was the Social Security Act. Now, there were obviously lots of things that happened before then, but that was the point that we really formalized social benefits for older people. And we now had a way of being able to be supported after our work life was over. And that came, with really great benefits for people. People were starting to live longer. I don't think they anticipated at the time that people would live as long as we are living now. That's been an added bonus. But we started to think about life as you work and then you go into retirement. In the 1950s and 60s, there were some really clever people who started to lean into this concept of retirement living and started to create places like the villages. So places that were all about age segregated living. So you saw them popping up in Florida, you saw them popping up in Arizona, and they really started to sell a lifestyle and glamorize retirement. So retirement became like this thing that was a life of leisure where you just kind of, went to the beach and you just read books and you were, drinking your drinks and just having a good time. And that was, what we saw as the purpose of older adulthood. But the problem is, actually, there's a few problems. First of all, not everybody wants to retire. There are a lot of people who get meaning and purpose from work, and they would like to continue to do so as long as they would like to continue to do so. There's also a lot of people that can't afford to retire. So retirement is not a path for everybody. Yet we haven't had another way of describing later life. So when people say, what do you do? Because, in Western culture, we do that a lot. That's a very American thing. What do you do? People will say, I'm retired. Well, what does that actually tell me about you other than the fact that you used to work? It doesn't tell me about who you are now. It doesn't tell me what your goals are. It doesn't tell me what your purpose is. So we've left a substitute for a term that kind of is growth centric.
Exactly.
How do we keep growing and developing instead of retirement, which is withdrawal based? So I think that's kind of, been the problem is glamorized it and it doesn't really capture all the potential that we have in later life.
You're exactly right. We've glamorized it and marginalized it because the very base of the word retire means to step back. And, we need a new word for retirement. Just because you are not being paid to work does not mean you lack purpose or drive or personality or substance or worth or ideas so why lead with that? In your research, I don't remember this from the book, and I remember there's so many great parts of it. Did you come up with who coined the term retirement?
So not really who coined it. It used to be, there's a term called superannuated, and we kind of took it from there. But the concept of retirement was most formalized in Germany by Otto Bismarck. And he's the one who actually came up with kind of the social benefits piece. And he's the one that actually started with this age of 65, which is also interesting when you think about it. How did 65 become the age?
Well, I know that in 1940, by the time the Social Security Act was enacted in 1940, from when it was passed, the average lifespan was 65. So that's why 65, because the government didn't think we were going to live much longer. And so, and it hasn't been updated since. So there are benefits, as you pointed out, but I think what you and I and so many of our listeners are really focused on is how do we reframe this time into being a one, as you said, that is growth-based, not, I don't want to lead with what I'm not.
Exactly.
I don't want to say to people, oh, I'm not this, I'm not that.
Exactly. And for me, that's why I like the term elderhood. And it's nothing that I write about. It's something that I talk about. I see elderhood as a developmental stage that follows adulthood. Not to say that elders are not adults. I don't mean that. It just means that the roles that we have in midlife, which usually focus around raising a family, our careers, those change. Those goals change. Those roles change in later life. And I think elderhood can capture that in a kind of strengths-based way. And I do think we need the language. You talked about how words matter. They do. So we have to find kind of some way of talking about this more productively, more holistically than we do now.
I agree. And I think your point earlier in our conversation was that age is not binary. It's youth is good and age is bad. And age doesn't mean disease.
Yeah.
Age means literally getting older, which every single one of us, if we're lucky, we're doing that every day. We're getting older. And in our society, to go back to my favorite birthday card example, it's so pervasive. It's so overwhelming that we really have to band together and turn it around, turn every compliment, you look good for your age, and all of those things, turn them around. Do you have specific suggestions for our listeners about, number one, how do they recognize ageism when they see it? And number two, how do they destroy it or deflate it or change it?
Yeah, I have lots of them. How long do you have?
We have 45 minutes.
Not for a while.
I should say also, for those who are listening and really engaged in this, there's a link to Dr. Gendron's book in our show notes, which you can get. And it's so worth it to go back and understand from our history how this happened. There's a lot more practical advice in the book. But anyway, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
How do our listeners, when they turn off their podcast and they go into a grocery store or they have a dinner party, how do they recognize ageism and confront it?
I think the first step is that we need to literally take our blinders off, which is one of the reasons I call the book Ageism Unmasked, because we have to unmask ourselves so that we can see what has become largely invisible. Ageism truly is invisible because we've just accepted it. And we've accepted it for decades upon decades. And it hasn't been challenged until now. Now there's a movement underway. But until now, there hasn't been. So we have just kind of blindly swallowed all of this. And it comes from exactly what you were talking about, the birthday cards, the anti-aging industry, the how to look 20 years younger, the dress for your age, all kinds of things that really at its core are stigmatizing and shaming what it means to be old and lifting up what it means to be young. So I think the first step in that is actually looking at yourself. It all starts with self. And I challenge people to think about the word old, how they define the word old. I challenge them to think about if they recognize themselves as an aging person, or if aging is about those old people over there or all over there. We're all aging, as you said. I challenge people to actually think about aging in the right way. When most people think about aging, they think about it in a very decline-based way. Aging is, my body doesn't work the same way it used to. My shoulders hurt, my knees hurt. And all of that is true. We do experience decline. However, aging is the process of biopsychosocial spiritual change. And that change means, as well as decline, we have growth, we have adaptation, we have maintenance. We have all of these things that happen simultaneously, which makes it really complicated. So start to rethink about your own aging. Maybe ask yourself, what do I like about myself better now than I did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? And I know you will think of a way that you have grown, a skill that you have developed, a way that you feel more comfortable in your own skin. That's your aging. And if we can identify with that and we can walk away with, wow, I actually feel really proud, then we've taken the first step to breaking down old to breaking down this decline-based narrative we have. So once we internalize it, then we can go from there.
I love that. I love that because who among us would like to be 16 years old again?
It was hard.
It was hard. It was very hard. And I do think it's similar to practicing gratitude, right? You may not have the perfect body, but is your body carrying you from work to home, upstairs? Are you able to do certain things? I think we have to be more realistic. We are so bombarded with images of what perfect looks like and what youth looks like. And it's kind of acclimatized or helped normalize being unhappy with your body and yourself. And I'm speaking absolutely as a woman here. We are drenched in images that are unrealistic and, have all kinds of retouching done.
Yes.
And we really need to come from more of a place of gratitude and acceptance. And I love that you say start by, thinking about yourself and what you're happy about, what you're grateful for that you have right now.
Yeah. And that you've learned over time. It really does start with self. And yes, and success. We're taught that success is one certain thing. There's one certain path. Successful aging means I have to maintain abilities. I have to maintain activity. Says who? You define success. You define what is successful for you and recognize that actually as you age, that definition can change. So I just think we need to be a little bit more, graceful with ourselves. We need to give ourselves kind of some room to grow.
And I think you explain that very well in your book, that you redefine success in older age as more being focused as opposed to doing, and recognizing that at different periods of time in our lives, we're focused on different things. And in our American culture, it's doing, busy, busy, busy. That is held up as a frustratingly pervasive sign of success, is that you're busy, which is so sad.
Yeah.
And that you talk about part of being older is being and using the accumulated wisdom and experience differently than when we were younger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's not for everyone. I just want to kind of clarify by saying there's some people who they are happy doing, and they're going to continue to be happy doing their entire lives. And that's terrific. But some people, really evolve into a quieter state of reflection and a quieter state of being. There's this concept called gerotranscendence by Lars Tornstrom that I just love, that really talks about how some people experience a developmental shift where they turn inward instead of focusing their energy outward. And that inward focus is really productive because it is really actually then helping us grow in different kinds of ways, whether it's building a legacy, whether it's making peace within ourselves and our families. It's just that we need to kind of expand the way that we see these opportunities. And as you said, busyness and doing isn't necessarily the right thing or the goal for everybody. That really goes for all stages, but we do celebrate busyness. We do hear a lot.
Excessively celebrate busyness. I also think this is consistent with other folks I've talked to, is that as you live longer, your need for friends, you want the deeper friendships. It doesn't have to be as many. So it doesn't have to be hordes of people, but it has to be people that see you, understand you at maybe a deeper level.
Yes.
Is that consistent with your...
It is, yes. And I call that pruning sometimes. We prune the relationships that are not really serving us as well. And instead we have kind of a smaller social network, but that smaller social network is one that really feeds us, is one that we really choose to invest in those relationships. And that's actually quite a beautiful thing because we know attachment is really important. We know that relationships is really the key. We are social creatures. We always want to be in relationship with other people. But to have that smaller, more intimate network as you grow older is definitely something that the research has showed is something that's very positive.
And it helps with all aspects of life, helps with happiness and your own personal health. It's incredibly important. If you're getting smarter, help us reach more minds. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends to follow us on social or subscribe to our newsletter at seniorityauthority.org. One of the things I want to talk about is that you point out in the book that there are two extremes we are shown in society. Either aging is old and decrepit, or the inverse where you are ageless and perennially young. And you talked briefly about the age-defying industry and stay young, and 80 is a new 60 and 50 is a new 30. And I personally would like for people just to own their age and be happy about it. And it doesn't dictate behavior or looks, but this striving to present yourself as younger than you are is something that also is foisted upon us by billion-dollar industries.
Indeed. Yes, it certainly is. And that's that whole anti-aging industry. I really dislike the term ageless. It is one of my pet peeves. I think that saying ageless really denies age. To me, it's just covering it up instead of embracing the facts that we are whatever age we are. And I'm with you, Kathleen. Let's just own it. Let's just embrace it. I also don't like when people say I'm 51 years young. No, I'm 51 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take that word old and I'm going to own it. And it does go back to that question of I've learned too much, I've grown too much, and it's been hard at it. So I'm not going to give that away by saying I'm young. I've earned my oldness. So, I do think that we fall into a trap, though, when we portray older people as either a super ager, someone that can, jump out of an airplane, run a marathon, or incredibly frail. Because just like every other stage of life, there's more people in the middle that are just normal people than there are at the polar ends. It's a continuum. And I think we need to represent that continuum. We need to not make older adulthood into a caricature of one of the other, but just normalize that it is just life. That's it. It's just life.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And one of the folks I was talking to recently said, I would like to end the word age appropriate and say person appropriate. So you could be, as I am, 64, and it is person appropriate for me to go to the gym, lift weights, etc. It is not person appropriate for me to run a marathon because I can do a half marathon, but not a full marathon, and I'm fine with that. And I haven't done a half marathon in years. So everybody is at a different stage, but I don't let anyone tell me what is appropriate for me to wear or not. I'll make all those mistakes myself, but it's person appropriate. There might be someone else who's 64 who can't lift weights or can't do some of the things that I can do or can do more, who is running marathons, but I do believe it's so unrealistic. We're like, everyone should be running marathons at age 80, but maybe you don't want to.
Exactly.
And you don't have to. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone.
And age is such a bad marker predictor of anything. As you said, you can have someone who's 65 who is running marathons and somebody who's 65 who has a lot of comorbidities and frailties. And that's okay. Age is just a bad predictor. And as we get older, we get less like each other and more like ourselves. So it makes it even a worse predictor the older you get to expect that somebody of a certain age will act a certain way or should do a certain thing.
Talk a little bit more about that. I find this fascinating. And in my anecdotal life, I feel that people do become more of who they are. They get more settled or concretized. But talk a little bit about what you found.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. The individuation of aging, it just really shows us that as we age, we continue to become more and more our unique selves. And that's because when you think about, all the different identities that we have and all the unique experiences that we have based on those identities, you can't replicate that in another human being. Your life is very different from everybody else's who is the same age as you. So, it's just a process of becoming uniquely us. And that's actually what I think aging is. It's a continuing process of becoming. We never stop evolving and we never stop, being more and more authentic to who we are.
And this is a perfect message for boomers, by the way, because we are all about ourselves and we are all about breaking convention and to be more of us, to frame aging in a growth mindset.
Yes.
Is, I think, the work of every single person listening to this podcast and everyone that we meet and interact with is to change how we think about ourselves and other people. I mean, it happens so consistently. I was on a hike the other day and someone was coming the other way. And I was like, hey, you're doing great. And he's like, well, for my age. And I want to say, why are you doing that? You're doing well because you're outside and walking. Don't apologize and don't volunteer that your age equals frailty or lessened expectations.
We wouldn't point out other forms of our identity. We wouldn't say I'm doing well because I'm a woman.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
With age, it's like if you substitute that, you go, yeah, that is a little strange.
Hey, I'm doing really well for Irish as I'm walking in the woods. So yeah, that's a great analogy.
Like, that's weird.
I like that. Flip that. If you're listening, flip that. And next time someone says, you look good for your age, substitute, you look good for being Irish or Italian or, a woman.
Exactly.
Don't accept it. Don't accept it. And I don't know, do you have recommendations for our listeners, Tracy, as to how they can ask strength-based, growth-centric questions? So next time you're at a dinner party when there's not COVID, and someone says, what do you do? How do you respond if you are not working for pay any longer, otherwise known as retirement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's fine to share with people, this was my career and this is part of my identity. But I think the question shouldn't be, what do you do? But just tell me about yourself. And then don't talk about who you were. Who are you? What are you interested in now? What are your goals? What are your ambitions? Well, how do you spend your time during the day? What have you read or watched lately that really interested you and piqued your curiosity? What are the things that you think about that you want to learn more about? There's so much more to us than just our jobs. And
Amen.
Yes. And just thinking through, and that means for the other people asking the questions, it's time for us to stop making assumptions that someone's older and wants to be asked about their past, because we default to that. We really do.
We do.
In long-term care, we are consistently trying to reorient people to who they were and remind them of past days. What about who you are and who you're becoming? So I think if we really do those growth-centric, future-centric questions, just like we would with a teenager going, what do you think you're going to study? School after, or do you want to study a trade? We ask these growth-centric questions. We can do that for people of all ages.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And to focus on the here and now.
Yeah.
And tell me what you're interested in. I like that reframing of tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
As opposed to what do you do?
Yep.
Tell me about yourself. I think that is fantastic. And in the book, you have a lot of great recommendations and suggestions for people as to how to reframe things in terms of being growth-centric. You have suggestions for resources in addition to your book that you would recommend for folks who want to learn a little bit more, educate themselves a little bit more on this topic?
Definitely. There's some people out there and some organizations doing some amazing work. The Old School website, it's oldschool.info, is fantastic. They have tons of free resources on that site, from podcasts to books to articles to videos, all kinds of things. It's all anti-ageism. So that's a great one. The Reframing Aging Initiative that is led by GSA, Ontological Society of America. They have a ton of great info. And Changing the Narrative Colorado, that's another one that also has some really good information about anti-ageism work. We're fortunate. This is really starting to catch on. A movement is underway and we're having more conversations. So just go out and Google anti-ageism and you're going to find a lot more things than you did even a couple of years ago.
Yeah, people are really waking up to this, and I'm excited because it is long past time for us to think differently about aging.
Definitely.
I'm so excited that you have been here. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you would want to share with every one of our listeners?
I think there's a million things. I would be curious to hear if your listeners have other topics they would want to hear about. That's always interesting to me when people first talk about ageism, what resonates with them and what they want to learn next. But I would just encourage everybody to, take it one day at a time, to not blame or shame yourself, because if this is your first time thinking about it, this is your starting point. So it's a journey and it's a process. And it takes a while to make some of these connections, and just keep at it. Keep thinking about it, keep working on embracing your aging and recognizing that you continue to become.
I was just thinking that. I was thinking we should tape "I Am Still Becoming" to our bathroom mirrors, and that we need to celebrate, not denigrate aging.
Yes.
We really do. So to my listeners, please, you know that I love questions. And I think that Dr. Gendron just said, if you have questions, she might come back and answer them. So email at info@seniorityauthority.org if this piques your interest and you want to learn more. But we're not going to let you go, Tracy, without getting to know a little bit more about you. So I have a fast 5 lightning round. We know you're a smart gerontologist. We know you're an excellent writer. And those people that are going to line up to buy your book know that. Now, share with us your guilty pleasure, your favorite guilty pleasure.
Okay. Guilty pleasure would be going to the grocery store and getting a great big tub of ice cream that has chunks of stuff in it, and then sitting on the couch and picking out the chunks.
You just described what I did last night. And I texted my friend, and I said, I learned again, you cannot sit with a spoon and a container of ice cream. You put it in a dish and put it away.
Less fun that way.
Yeah. Okay. As a counter to that, what's your favorite healthy?
I do have just about daily exercise. It's mental health 101 for me.
Yeah. What's your exercise you like?
I love weights. I actually really love strength training.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
What is guaranteed to make you laugh?
I will say laugh and cringe is my husband's dad jokes every time.
Okay. Do you have one you can share?
Oh,
it has to come from him.
It does. And they're random and they're silly. And I roll my eyes and laugh at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Last book that you loved.
I read a lot, but the last book that really resonated with me was called The Light Through the Leaves. And it's by Glendy Vanderhoff. And I just kind of came across it and I just found it to be a beautiful read. Beautiful book.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to mark that one down. And your favorite of all places, escape?
I would say, travel if possible. But if I need an escape and I'm at home, I think that either a good documentary or a true crime show, for some reason, both of those just tend to tune me out and take me away.
Yeah. And that is nothing like a mental vacation as you can get sitting in your own home.
Yes.
Well, that is so fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time and educating us about how to see and recognize and end ageism one conversation at a time. This has been just brilliant. I've loved talking with you.
Same, Kathleen. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
That's our show for today. If you liked it, give us a rating or review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends so we can reach more minds and turn this ageism thing around. Until next time, enjoy the chance to get smarter about growing older.